And then on the end, we have Dr. Friedman, who I feel like has taught every chemistry course, Gen Chem 2, Gen Chem 1, the whole 9 yards. So he's very well known here as well. And I think we're going to get started by asking each of our panelists to share a little bit about maybe the do's and don'ts that they have for letter writing, a couple anecdote stories if you wish, and any other information, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Okay, anyone can start.
Oh, why don't we start? Dr. Friedman and I had already done this workshop before, so we'll pick up the slack.
Okay. I think one of the privileges we have as instructors is to see you move on to the next level. So I take writing letters of recommendation very seriously. I know it can impact your admission process. First day I tell students, if you get at least a B, I can write a letter of recommendation on your behalf. If you get a C, it's very difficult, right? Because you don't have any program out there actively recruiting C students, average students. So it will be very difficult for me to do it. And if I don't do a good job, I'll nicely decline writing a letter of recommendation. One thing that I find most students will do, they will take my course, especially the seniors for BSc 447 endocrinology. During the period of the semester, I'll see them once or twice. They don't attend my office hours. They don't need to. Maybe they're doing very well in the course. They will end up with an A, decent grade, and I'm glad to write a letter of recommendation. But what will happen is, they will not ask me during the semester they are taking the course. So a year later, they will write and say, oh, I took your course in 2011, and I really enjoyed it. You are such a great professor. Can you write me a letter of recommendation? And I have no idea who's writing the email, right? I think the best approach is to make an appointment. If you're in the area, make an appointment and come in, so we can at least connect the name with the face. That's very important. And then also to update me as to what you're doing, since you took the course or since you graduated. Because if you leave it to me to write a letter of recommendation based on your grade, what am I going to say? You were a great student. They could have deciphered that from the transcript. It doesn't help, right? But if you can either send me a CV or come in person to update the information that I had. Even if you send me a CV a year prior, you can still come by or email or whatever channel available to you, so that I can make the information correct. Because if I write based on just the grade, they're not very excited about it, right? And these letters of recommendation, one individual who reviews the application told me that it gives them a window into your soul. I don't know what that meant. And I think I'm not even looking for the soul when I'm writing it, but it will help them. They will want them to give them that access to the window into your soul, right? And the only way you can do it is if you can make that connection. So if you're taking a course, try and make 1 or 2 appearances during office hours. Try and make yourself known without pestering the instructor, right? Just somebody to say hi, even if you have a very simple question and you knew the answer to the question, you can still stop by and pose the question and try kind of your reasoning through. And I say, oh, wow, you get it. They said, oh, really? And then you go. I see that all the time. And students who know what you're talking about, but they still stop by. So at least they make that connection, and it's important. The next thing you want to do if you're going to ask for a letter of recommendation, once the person has agreed to do so, is to give the deadline. If you have a deadline, a date, give the date. If you don't, remember the other students also asking for letters of recommendation, and I might write it based on your deadline. So you could have asked 2 months prior, and then you're emailing me today saying, oh, my letter is due tomorrow. It's going to be a rush job. You don't want that. You want something that is well written, and anything that is well written takes time. And when I write letters of recommendation, I write it, and then I'll go back and review it. The second time around when you read it, it's like, oh, maybe I didn't want to post this statement this way. You can make changes this way. But if you're calling me today to let me know that it's due tomorrow, it may not be the optimal letter that I would have liked to write. I'll still send something because there's a deadline involved. I will do so. Thirdly, if you are going to request a letter of recommendation from an instructor or professor, the last thing you want to do is to let the person know you asked somebody else and the person didn't do it. Right? Don't do that. So, okay, I was late for that. You couldn't wait. So you go to Dr. Shi and say, oh, I asked Dr. Polk, I don't think she's going to write it. Can you write me one? Right? That's wrong. You don't want to do that. Because I might say, no. I have too many letters to write. Not because of, I guess it's an ego situation, let's face it. You know, it's not, I was your second choice. I don't want to be second choice. Take it out. So if that was a reason, don't give it. Just say that, oh, you just realized that you needed 3 letters, you had already asked 2 people, and there's a thing. Is there any way you could write a letter of recommendation on my behalf? Right. And in terms of my anecdote, I got a very interesting situation. I teach 201, BSc Human Anatomy and Physiology. Most of the students in there are on the free nursing track. So they're going to apply to nursing program, other program, pharmacy, whatever it may be. But I had this student about 5 years ago. I didn't know her personally, but she had asked for a letter of recommendation and agreed to do so. I don't know what happened. Then I got a call from University of Maryland, nursing school, SOM. And they asked if I'd written a letter on behalf of this person. And I said, not really. I mean, she had asked, but I hadn't done it. They said, oh, there's a letter here that it seemed like she's claiming you wrote it, right? And it wasn't, I didn't write it. And to make it worse, nobody signs their name with the title. You know, if I sign my name, I put Justice Shoko. The person put Dr. Polk as my signature. So I had to say no. So what they did was to send a letter to the legal office on campus here. I had to go and swear an affidavit saying that I didn't write a letter because they were going to bar her from getting into any nursing program in this country. If she started forging letters now, what will she do later when she's a nurse? When other people's health will be depending on her documentation. And as a nurse, documentation is number one. You have to document everything, right? So sometimes the temptation is there. And I would have written a very good letter for her. She did well in the course. All she had to do was to send me a CV. Stop by if she could. I don't think she lived in Oregon or anything. She was just in this area. Stop by, you know, and try and get it done the proper way. Right? So all these things take planning and time. You give any instructor 2 months, you are going to get a very good letter. We are all interested in seeing you succeed because you're a reflection on us. And the first day I go to class, if you took 201 with me, I tell you they are going to do well in my course. I will do my part, you have to do your part. And if you don't do your part, I'll come after you. Because if you don't look good, I don't look good. So I make that joke all the time. But initial reflection on us, we want to see you move on to the next level. You will not believe how many people will come to my class and say, oh, my uncle had you, my father had you 20 years ago. I know, I'm teaching second generation. I've been here for 22 years. So now I had students who came last semester. And he said, oh, my dad took your class 20 years ago.
It's always a shock, isn't it?
I know. I think I'm young. No. So funny the aging process, but I didn't think that it was that old. But we're really happy to see you succeed, and we know that the letters of recommendation is an important process that you have to go through and move on to the next level. So you take it as seriously as anything else. Don't leave it to the last minute and scramble around and get everything, you know, not done well. Because we also have things that we're doing. So if you give us more time, we have more time to write it. I read it over. Any letter that I don't write and just send it. I'll read it over. And then when I think it's really up to par, then I send it. And I'm happy when you said, oh, thank you, when I see the congratulation letters. Right? And some of you will do that. Once you write letters of recommendation and get into your program, instead of telling us that you did get it, you actually send us a copy of the acceptance letter, and I love that. I keep all of them, yeah. So I'd like to see more of those emails coming in. Okay, thank you.
Reiterate, we really want to help you. Especially, I remember asking professors for grad school recommendations 30-something years ago. And yeah, I was anxious and I thought that, you know, I was asking to do a lot. So I understand when people ask for letters of recommendation that, you know, your professional career is sort of based upon this, not, you know, your transcript and all that you've done, but the letters are an important part of your application. So we understand that. But at the same time, I want to write a good letter. I've read enough recommendations from grad school applications to our program that I can see when a letter is useless. You know, you read it, you go, get nothing out of it, throw it away. And you know, the bad thing about sort of a nothing letter is it reflects on the student. You know, they ask 3 references for recommendations, and they pick someone who really can't say anything about you. So I'll talk a little bit about, to focus on something different, the types of courses you should be looking at for letters of recommendation. I teach 2 types of courses. I teach Principles of Genetics, large lecture course with discussion sections in the spring, and in the fall I teach a small lab course, Molecular Genetics Lab, where it's just 21 students and me. We work 6 hours of class time or lab time a week on long-term projects, and I can see how they respond to problems and how they interact with other students. You know, when things don't work, do they throw beakers against the wall, or do they talk with their partners or me and figure out what's going wrong and go back and redo it. And so picking the right kind of course can give you a much more valuable recommendation. So lab course is really easy to get recommendations, useful recommendations, because they see how you interact with others and interacting with problems and writing lab reports and things like that. Lecture courses are more difficult. So fortunately in genetics we have a discussion section run by Dr. Shields, and there's TAs that work with you. And there's also lab courses where, sure, the professor isn't there during the lab session, but there is a TA who works with you and makes the same observation. So one thing is to think of the type of course that you want to take. Sure, get into a small course where you can work with the professor, he sees your thought process, but if not, think about a lab course where you're interacting with the TA. They're seeing how you're problem solving and talking with others. And then talk with the TA to see if that TA might help write a recommendation. You know, the professor is going to have to write the recommendation, but it's really useful to have the TA's input. And so when I write recommendations for the genetics course, the Principles of Genetics course, I ask who their TA was, and I talk with that TA to get input into that recommendation so that we can say how you problem solved and how you dealt with other students, and were you late all the time or were you on time? Did you ask questions? Did you participate? Those very useful things for recommendations that the med schools are looking for, not just what grade you got. You know, they saw what grade you got. Sure, there's different ways of getting that grade, but really they're looking for something much deeper than that. So it's something to think about as you're picking courses, to try to find courses that would be good for letters of recommendation.
Thank you.
So I just want to agree with everything that they've said, and I want to add a couple of things. So first of all, when you approach somebody who is teaching 4-letter recommendation, and you are doing it as Dr. Apuku said, and you're doing it after the fact, if you send them an email and you say, I would like to talk to you about the possibility of maybe getting a letter of recommendation, and I took your class, you know, 2 semesters ago, whatever, I'm going to make this one really important suggestion. Could you include a small JPEG of your picture? Because I am not going to remember Joe Smith, but if I see your picture attached to that, I might actually be able to go, yeah, why don't you come in and we'll talk? Because I don't remember names, but I swear to God, I remember faces. Particularly if I know you and you came into my office for office hours and you spent time with me, then I'm going to talk. But if you didn't, I'm going to go, I have no clue who you are, you didn't come visit me. No. Because I have one rule, and one rule alone. I have to know you in order to send a letter. I just do. And so, I don't know how many of you have seen this. Do you guys know what I'm showing here? This is for med schools now, but it's also going to be the same thing used for a lot of dental schools too. And this is called This is the key areas of interest that are used when a person like me writes a letter of recommendation, but this is also what's used in writing your committee letter. And what they ask us to write about when we write a letter of recommendation, they want us to, they don't want us to tell you about the course that you took. They don't care. They don't want us to tell you what grade you got. They can look that up. They don't care about any of that information. So when you ask somebody, you know, I got an A in your course, will you write me a letter of recommendation? And they can't really speak to anything else but that, you're going to get a really bad letter of recommendation. This is what they want us to be able to talk about. Do you have really good critical thinking skills? You know, have you demonstrated that you have quantitative thinking skills, and how? Can I write about how you have that? Have you demonstrated good scientific inquiry, or are you have really good written communication skills? So if your emails to me consist of, yo, doc, BTY, you know, blah, 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 you know, LOL, see you Tuesday. And trust me, more than half of my emails from you look like that. What does that tell me about your written communication skills? Right? And trust me, most of my emails from my students usually start that way. And I'm okay with a hey, Dr. Shields, instead of a dear Dr. Shields. I'm okay with a hey, Dr. Shields. But yo, doc doesn't work. All right? I'm also supposed to address science competencies. Now, I usually don't worry so much about that because I figure other people will do that. What I work on are what most of my letters, because this is something I'm really great at, and this is, and Dr. Apuka is really great at this too, because I've read some of her letters, because Dr. Friedman and I are on the HPAO committee, so we see a lot of these letters, are these interpersonal competencies. And that means we see letters and we can talk about, are you, reliable and dependable? Have you shown great adaptivity? Do you have a capacity for involvement in the world? So when you come and you talk to me, after genetics class, and you talk to me about, so Dr. Shields, I'm thinking about doing this, Habitat for Humanity thing this summer. What do you think about that? Oh, great. And then you come after the summer and you tell me about it. It's like, woo-hoo. But that's something I can put in a letter. Right? And that's called a capacity for involvement and helping your fellow man. And I can speak to it because I've seen the light in your eye. Right? And these are the kinds of things that work for you in a letter that's written by me. I can speak to that stuff. The other thing is oral communications. Here's my anecdote about that. One of the girls who got the highest grade in 105 and the second highest grade in genetics, she had a 4.0 when she left Maryland. She applied for medical school. She got 4 interviews and didn't get into any medical school. And that's because every third word out of her mouth was like, like, yeah. I mean, like, I really, I'm so involved in, like, and I just, it's like, and I'm just like, oh my God. I did 2 prep interviews with her before she had her mock interview here. And in my letter, I said, when I write my letter for you, I'm going to talk about how intelligent you are, how much I love you, but I'm also going to put a paragraph that you can't say a complete sentence. And she goes, are you really? And I said, I have to. I would be remiss if I didn't, and it's something you need to work on. And by the time she went for her interview, she still couldn't do it. She didn't get in. She's reapplying again. That's oral communication, and that's one of the skills they're looking for. Okay? And these are the kind of things that we look for when you come and ask for us. So I need you to write me a letter of recommendation. Is that really a request? I'm thinking not. But it's my own, kind of humble opinion. The other thing is when you ask somebody for a letter of recommendation via email, you should request that you would like to come see them about the possibility of writing a letter of recommendation instead of forwarding them 72 attachments about your letter of recommendation, which I have gotten. This week I had somebody come up to me and ask me, what was my policy for writing letters of recommendation? And I said, My first policy is knowing students. And they asked me if I had any leeway on that policy. I said no. So I did have another wonderful, I have my last anecdote and I'll pass off to Lee, is my other favorite letter of recommendation is, I was coordinating a lab and we actually happened to have lab on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. Sad, I know, it just happened that way. It was a brutal thing, but we had lab the day before Thanksgiving and there was something going on and we had to do it. So, and she decided not to come. And I saw her the following Monday and I said, you weren't in lab. And she goes, yeah, I wasn't going to come. And I said, well, you know, you didn't get credit for that. And she goes, why not? Well, you weren't in lab. So the next day, I got an email from her mother, who was a physician, that she was too sick to come to lab. And I told her I wasn't accepting her excuse. And she said, well, it's from the assigned physician. And I said, you know, I'm not going to send you to the honor court, and let's just leave it at that. Here's the best part. She got an A in the class. She came up to me afterwards and asked me for a letter of recommendation. And I looked at her and I said, I do not believe I can write you a strong letter of recommendation. And I was leaving it at that. I just thought, I'm just going to say, I can't write you a strong letter of recommendation. She put her hands on her hips and goes, what do you mean you can't write me a strong letter of recommendation? I got an A in your class and I was one of your best students. And I looked at her and God saved me. What I said to her is like, why don't you ask your mommy? And that was the end of it.
Thank you. One thing I'd like to add before Dr. Friedman, just one thing I want to piggyback off of, because I know Wendy would say it if she were here. Wendy always says that you want to ask your letter writers if they can write you a strong letter, like Dr. Shields is saying. Or can you write me a good letter? Because maybe a teacher will write you a letter out of the kindness of their heart and they don't know you, but you want to make sure it is strong and it will have quality things.
And this is a really important point. When a student asks me if they can write me a letter, if I can't write them a really strong letter, I let them know. The only letter I can write you is one that said you came to my class and you got an A. My letter will not be strong. You would be better off getting a letter from someone who knows you better. And I always tell them that.
I don't know if I can follow up the story that was just told. So I'll tell you about my experiences, I guess, and this will be kind of scattered because I think what most of the panelists said before were pretty accurate with. One thing that I would just adapt to me. Again, we can all put stats about, how well you did in our course and what you scored in exams and, the description of the course and what the contents are, which for me is kind of boilerplate stuff because it's pretty standard across different universities, like what's in organic chemistry and what's in regular chemistry. So for me, it's really about you guys and interpersonal skills and your abilities and your, that stuff. And it's really hard for me to write something when I don't know a person well. I think back to the strongest letters that I've written for people, and they were students that came in my office on a routine basis, even just to say hi. One happened to be a year after I had my GSS leader for 3 semesters and a TA for me once. One was a student that I had in Gen Chem, and she took me for, I think it was 272, and she came in on a routine basis. And I knew her really well, so I could really attest to things about their personality, things like determination and interpersonal skills and, the willingness to work hard. And, when they talk about their other courses, and when you guys talk to us about your other courses, we kind of get a sense of what's important to you. So if you're like, I took this course versus, because it was easy, I think back to what one of the students I wrote the letter for said. And he said when he took one of my colleagues' courses, and I won't say who it was, he was frustrated that he was taught in a way that kind of allowed him to memorize things as opposed to understanding why things were happening. So he was kind of frustrated about how the course was taught from like an intellectual aspect, which said a lot to me about what, the kind of student he was and what he was looking for. And so, it's hard, I think, to write letters where you just don't know people well. Again, send a picture, that's a really good idea. The first thing I usually do when somebody sends me a letter is I say, who is this? I type I say that for everyone. Then I type their name into the little what is it, magnifying glass in the upper right corner of the Mac, to pull up my grade sheet so I can look at what they got in my course. Then I go look at their grades in their other courses on our the system. I basically look at the transcript, and I look at the picture to see if I can remember the person. And that's kind of what I go off of initially. We're telling stories, I guess. I'll tell you the story about a letter from a year, maybe 2 years ago or so. I was sitting at home, and it wasn't for med school, but it was like for, I think, an REU program over the summer. I was sitting at home, and it's like Saturday, and I'm checking my email and stuff, and see a request for a letter from a guy, and then I go, okay, I don't remember getting a letter from him asking me for a letter. So I checked my email, there was no request anywhere. And then I'm like, what's going on? So I go and find his email, and then I email him, and I go, what's going on? And he's like, and then he doesn't respond for like 4 days. And then he sends me an email, and he's like, oh yeah, can you write a letter for me for this? You gotta be kidding me. So I wrote one, which actually I wouldn't do now because I'm kind of involved in this, but I basically wrote like the minimum, has a pulse, gotta be in my course. That's kind of what happens when you go to people by the wrong process and you ask them for a letter. And so it's really sort of about playing the game, the political game and stuff. In terms of like knowing people, I would sort of differ with what Dr. Strady said. I actually find it harder to write letters for people that take lab courses with me compared to people that take lecture courses. And I would say that for a couple of reasons. In lab courses, I just don't see you guys as much as I see people in lecture courses. I see, you have your TAs, and so what I usually do in those cases is I'll ask the TA for like, a sentence or a couple paragraphs or, a couple sentences about you guys. And I'll basically put that into the letter after, correcting grammar and spelling and whatnot. But for me, lab courses are designed in kind of a weird way where they're composed of both exams and, take-home assignments that you get a week to do. And I know what happens when you guys do labs. You talk to each other and stuff like that. And so it might be that you're really good at writing lab reports and answering questions, or you might know someone that's really good and they help you out a lot and stuff like that. And so for me, exam grades and labs really tell me more about people's performances as a student compared to how people do on labs. And so when I write a letter and I'm like, well, they did really well, but they did average on the exams, the labs are, you get a week to do them, and I think when people read those kind of letters, they kind of know that the standard for the labs is different than the standard for the exams. And on top of that, the lab courses have, our labs have 800 people. Sometimes last semester we had 850, and as little, if you can use the word little to describe 450, 400 people. And so rankings in there are very sort of variable, and there's kind of a lot of things going on. And so I find it easier when I have exams and lecture courses to just base it off of that. If you've taken a course with someone and you're going to ask them for a letter and you don't know them well, I would suggest offering to go meet with them. A lot of times it doesn't do a lot of stuff, but I think back to one guy I wrote a dental letter for maybe last year. Never heard of him. He was in my course, but I never heard of him. And then he got like an A in my course. He did really well. He was a really good student. It turned out he was a double major in business and one of the biology majors that they have, maybe neurophys, but I'm making that up. And he came by and he started telling me how he wants to start this dental clinic practice where he puts like central dental clinics in areas and sort of has outside clinics that report to them. And I was just blown away that he's thinking about like dentistry from the perspective of business aspect, and I thought it was really creative. And I wasn't prepared for that at all. And it told me a lot about sort of what he was thinking up here. And I ended up writing a really strong letter because it was something that wasn't expected, and I thought it was a very outside the box kind of idea. But that never would have happened if he didn't offer to come and introduce himself to me. And so when if you're going to ask someone that you don't know well for a letter, offer to go introduce yourself and talk to them for a little bit, because it puts a face to the name. We get sort of a sense of who you are beyond just the academic stuff, for telling stories. I think back to I wrote a committee letter for a guy for med school a couple of years ago, and I had him in one of my courses, and he was a really smart student. He was a double major, I think, in chemistry and math, and he had like a 393 or something like that. And I wouldn't have trusted that guy to take care of my goldfish. He didn't have the kind of interpersonal skills that make you confident that he can interact with other people in a constructive way. He wasn't making eye contact. He was playing with his hair and scratching his head the whole time, and he's talking in a very scattered, unfocused way. And there's more to it than just getting good grades. And so us knowing about that kind of stuff is really important. And I think that's all I can remember for now. I'm sure during questions you guys will think of other stuff that sparked my memory. I'll stop there.
Thank you. So at this time, we'll take questions from the audience, and if you have a question, you can come up to the mic and ask it from there, but if you're comfortable projecting from your seat, that's good as well.
Do you feel that every letter you write is unique?
I would say for the people I know well, they are unique. For the people I don't know well and still insist upon a letter, no, they're not unique at all. In fact, they're very boilerplate. For the kids who, Dr. Shields, I'm desperate, and I'll take it anyway, then they're very boilerplate. For the kids I really know well, I mean, today I wrote 4 letters, and one of them was for a desperate kid, and it was very boilerplate. But 3 of them were for kids I know really well. One of them is someone who has been a TA for me in genetics for 3 semesters. And one of them is someone who's been a GSS leader for me for 1 semester and now has been a ULA for me in 105 for 3 semesters. And I wrote her a 2-page letter. And I mean, and that's long. That's really long. Most letters of recommendation are 1 page. And it was a 2-page letter. And it was awesome. It was really awesome. She walked on water. Really, it was a great letter. I mean, I wrote some really good letters today. But letters for people you really know are easy to write. When you really don't know the person that well, trying to write a unique letter is so hard and takes forever. But for the kids that you know, they roll off and they are a sweet little thing to write. I can't say that's how.
I was going to say also there are different degrees to which we know you. You know, if you come into our office once or twice, we know you differently than if you come in, you know, a couple of times throughout the semester and keep coming in after that. And so even people that come by that I've spoken to a couple of times, if I just don't know them very well, I can say, yeah, you know, they're pleasant to interact with and stuff like that. But I really can't go beyond it. So there are different degrees to which you can get to know people well. While I started saying this, remember Patty and I made the point at the other workshop that we did, that I personally love when people just come in to just say hi. And there's no stakes on the line. There's no change my grade from a B minus to a B plus. There's no, I want more points on this, Just, hey, where are you from, We just start talking about random stuff. People come in and comment on my Star Wars Mr. Potato Heads, and then we kind of have a conversation.
I have too. We both have Star Wars Mr.
I guess I need to get that.
But I love it when students come by just to say hi. And those are the people for me that get the strongest recommendations because we see them over 3 years. We see how you grow, and it makes a big difference versus just 1 or 2 office hour visits during the semester for 10 minutes at a time, asking some random question about something.
They're just coming by and saying hi. That could get annoying.
It does get annoying.
If it looks like, oh, I'm going to be asking for a letter and I just say
so
hi.
I'm just coming by.
It's nice to come by for a reason. If you're coming by for office hours, not making up some question and sort of taking up time, but you can ask about, applications of what you're learning. Yeah, you understand it. Where does that go in terms of research? Broader questions, not, can we go over this problem? And it's obvious that, yeah, you know how to do that problem. It's a waste of time. You're not going to impress anyone with that, but, being involved and talking about the science would be useful. I love talking about how things we're talking about in class can apply to other things.
Yeah, I think it's the quality of the visit, not the quantity.
Yeah.
And I had a student, we've been talking about cholesterol in class, and I had a student this morning, yesterday, wasn't this morning, yesterday, the new guidelines on cholesterol. And this student actually made a copy and gave it to me. Now I know him. Right? So something like that is very, very helpful. I'm not going to forget him. And if he comes by and says, oh, can you write me a letter of recommendation? I'm going to, of course. I insist. Right? So it's about the quality of the interaction, not so much the quantity of interaction. So make it worthwhile. I know Megan for different reasons. So Megan took my course and she was taunting me. So that's a different story. I know. But it was a quality visit most of the time. because she will come with questions, or can I get 2 points? Can I get 2 points? But I was open to that, because when students come in with that, and I ask them, why do you think you deserve 2 points? It gets them to think. And sometimes they realize they don't even deserve the 2 points, and they leave.
I believe that's called quantitative reasoning.
Exactly. We both just like, oh, okay, I see. So sometimes you can come in for one reason and actually leave with more knowledge, not points, but more knowledge. And that's just as good, right? Because that interaction that we have with you actually makes us better teachers. Because next I will know how to present information, not to create that kind of confusion. So I always encourage my 400 level class students in my class to stop by for whatever reason to discuss the exam. And they do stop by thinking they're going to get a point or 2. And they don't. But I learned something from them. That's what it is.
Next question.
So was there ever a time that you ever wrote a letter that was for a student who wasn't an A or B student, and you could actually write something of substance for them?
I have.
I haven't.
I have. Kind of. I struggle for finding something redeeming. And there are some students that, I know it's not all about grades, and there's lots of students who are B students, C students who are there to understand the material, and yeah, they don't care about the grades, and that's great. And I can certainly find redeeming things for the letter if I know that, if it's just the grades.
It wasn't for medical school. I mean, but I wrote a letter of recommendation for somebody, and it was for something else, and he was a solid C student. But the letter was for a church scholarship.
Oh.
And I was happy to do it because this kid was in my office, I mean, twice a week, all week long. This kid worked harder than anybody else in my class. And I saw incredible progress over the course of the semester. And I mean incredible progress. And this kid worked. She worked her butt off in that class. And the scholarship was based on need and on character and a couple of other things. And all the things that this scholarship was based on, she had to the 9s. And I wrote her a really strong letter. She got the scholarship.
Yeah, the one that I was talking about wasn't for med school. I think it was for a post-bac program from a student. He got an A- in 272, and then I went and looked at his transcript, and it was like B- and C's, and I was like, what the heck is going on? It was like, the creature from outer space. He did well in my course, but he was like part, something else.
That happens a lot.
And it was really weird, and I wasn't sure what was going on, and so I kind of emailed him, like, what's going on? He's like, I really take my studies as seriously as I should have, and now I realize I need to beef up my grades by doing a post-bac. And so, based on my course, I kind of wrote a nice letter, I thought, considering, because I really had to talk for those kind of things about potential. He has the potential to succeed and the fact that he did in my course. But I looked at his grades in my course and they were really consistent. I was just really surprised. It wasn't like, he aced the exam and bombed everything. He did a really consistent job throughout the semester, so I don't know what it was. Maybe he really liked his TA or something. But generally, like we said before, my minimum grade for a letter is a B-. And I had a C+ student ask me for a letter, and I was just like, I don't think I can write either kind of letter that you would want, and suggested that you went to someone that you did better with.
Now, I've turned down A students, and I've written incredibly strong letters for B students. So, I look at the student before I look at the grade. That's what I do. And I know that other people, I know people who will only give letters for A students, and then I know people that will give letters to anybody. But I mean, for me, I look at the student first and then the grade. That's me.
In 201, because we have such a large student population, I rely on the TAs, TA input. And I actually quote, as Lee said, after I've cleaned up the grammar, I actually quote the TA in the letter. And I had a student some time back who had, a great student got an A, which is what we are all looking for, but was very rude and arrogant in lab. And of course, I wasn't privileged to that information, but when I asked the TA just went on and on and on, gave me examples of things. And reading it became an issue. I was thinking, is it personal? Because it was too much. So what I did was, I called some students in that section without telling them anything. I said, oh, so how is the lab? Is it well, organized, is everything going well? And then the girl said, actually, yeah, most of the time, except for this one student who's always interrupting the TA, who's always in there. I said, really? I said, who is that? I said, I think his name is, and then she got the first name right, but wasn't sure of the second. So I knew what the TA was saying was correct. So getting an A is not a guarantee, all right? That you're going to be a letter from the professor. And based on that, I had to refrain from writing a letter because I couldn't put what the TA said in there. Right? It wouldn't help. So I explained it to him. I said, the way people perceive you is just as important as your grade. And you can get to places if you're nice and polite. And I stress on politeness a lot because once you're rude to me, I take it very personally. And then I swing back. I have double personality. Which one are you looking for? So the students on the board, they say, oh, that book is so nice. And then Tom will say, really? She's not. She's not because you did something to me. Right? And the other person came up. And then they're like, ooh. But I think being rude is something that I have less tolerance for. You can be upset and all that, that's okay. But being rude is a sign of immaturity that I do not tolerate. And being rude in lab and disrupting the lab and getting other students involved, it was really a very bad situation. So it was an A student, but I said, no, I couldn't do it. Right? And I didn't rely only on the TA information. I got it from other students who were also in the lab session with this student. So when you go into lab, do what you have to do. Show enthusiasm. You don't have to be nice to the TA or anything. Just go in there and do what you have to do. And keep a very positive environment for other people as well. Right? But if you're going in there with this arrogance that I know everything and you're challenging a TA in front of the students, it's going to go against you in the long run. If not here, somewhere along the line, somebody is going to just push you back. Because you can't go through life throwing your weight around. It doesn't help.
And if you push that arrogance to insist that this person write you a letter, then that's even worse. I had one student in the lab that was pretty arrogant and insisted that I just had to write a letter for him. And yeah, I included that in the letter.
Ooh,
really?
No, it's like funny student who said, why not? Like a sense of entitlement.
That's what you, when somebody insists, that's what you include in the letter. It's like another thing about this student.
You try to spin it.
And if this is the kind of student that will fit well in your school, and he would make a wonderful addition. If not, perhaps you should look elsewhere.
Due to time constraints, we're going to take 2 more questions. I know on the right side of the room, she's had her hand up for a while.
Hi, so I was wondering if you just learned about an opportunity now and then 2 weeks before the deadline, would it be considered rude to ask your teacher if they could write them a letter of recommendation for you?
I take it it's for an internship as opposed to a full-blown medical school application.
2 weeks.
I'd say if you know the person, if you're in the class or you know them over a long term, go in with the apologies, it's late, but you just found this opportunity. If it's cold and you haven't had the class for a year or so, they have to try to talk with the TA or something, then it's pushing.
Here's the other thing too. When it's only 2 weeks, please be prepared for a no and do not but. Because if somebody says to you, I'm really busy now and I can't do it, and when you come back, but I don't have anybody else I can go to, and if you don't do this for me, my life will be ruined, and blah, blah, blah. That's when you put the onus back on us. And that's not really nice. And it makes us feel like dirt. And that happened to me 4 times in the last week. Because there are all these summer internship programs that people are just finding out about. And I had a bunch of requests for summer internship recommendations that came to me the first 3 weeks in January. And I said yes to a bunch of people. And I am now trying to get all of these done. And I have started saying no because I simply can't say yes anymore. I am overloaded with these letters. And people have been coming in this week going, and I said, and so my response for this last week has been, I am not saying yes to any recommendation that is due before spring break. That's it. If you have a recommendation that is due after spring break, I'll do it, but not before.
I know you kind of touched on it, but I just want to know how can students, like if a student's interested in getting to know a professor, just in general, how do you suggest without, feeling annoying or, just put some, or creepy, without having to do, also, just, yeah, that's all.
I don't think we feel pestered by you guys. I think what you need to do is, the instructor's office hours, you can stop by, and if you're going through the lecture portion and you find something that is not very clear, one thing you want to do is, as I said, is quality of the visit. Come in with some questions prepared, if that's what you're coming there to do. You don't come in, sit there, and then start going through your notes. You say, have you forgot why I'm here? Did we talk about this last week? No. So that is really a waste of our time. Right? So come in prepared, and if you don't have any questions, just stop by and introduce yourself. And let the professor know that in the future you may come back with questions. So have 1 or 2 questions jotted down, if possible, if you remember the date of the lecture. So the lecture we had on Friday, February 13th, which is tomorrow. And then, you ask, specific questions. That will be helpful. I think you become more, in my mind, you're more memorable that way. If you come very well prepared and organized. Then that means you respect my time as well as other people who might be waiting to come in.
The other way I would say 2 things. One is, I think a lot of you guys, I guess, take UNI 100. I think it's past that point for most of you, but a lot of times for those courses, they'll ask you to do an interview with a professor, and that's like a perfect opportunity. I realize it's when you get here and you don't know people very well, but that's one thing. Another thing is, I've had people come by and they'll say, I have like a guy emailed me on Friday who was like, I'm letters and sciences, so I don't know what I want to major in, so I want to find out, why did you choose chemistry or whatever. And that's, why did we make our career decisions? That's another way to do it, because, I guess, not to sound like egotistical, but, you're asking us about us, which feeds into our egos, which are almost. It's a way to find out more about us. And it's, when I talk to students that are about stuff that's outside of chemistry, it's typically about like pop culture, or, stuff on the internet or Reddit or whatever. And so it's rare that I end up talking about like my personal life. I mean, like, there's some things I won't talk about, a lot of stuff I won't. But stuff that I will, and that's one of the ways to do it. Why do people make career choices? They take it all up here for some reason. That I used to be pre-med for a semester, and then I decided that I wouldn't make a good doctor. So ask us about ourselves and how we made our career choices. I think it's a good way to do it.
I also think sometimes, it depends on the individual professor and what their thing is. Like, I have an open door policy. If my door's open and you walk by, Dr. Shields, do you have a minute? You remember me, I was in your class last semester, and you can come in and I usually ask you, well, what classes are you taking this semester? What are you doing? I do that with a lot of people. I can see several of you sitting here today, and you do that with me all the time, and that's fine. If that doesn't work with that particular professor, find somebody else. Then they don't deserve your time.
There's also a number of us who are advisors, and so you can come and talk about classes and which ones sort of fit your interests and things like that.
We're here to help. And unofficially, I act as mentor to some of the students. Unofficially, because it's not on paper anyway. Right? So they might not even be my boss. I said, oh, that's a book I've heard about you. Can I talk to you? I said, sure. And I like to talk, so we talk.
Well, can we get a round of applause for our lecturers?
All All right, that concludes our first meeting. Thank you everyone for coming out, and thank you to our panelists. We thought it was an amazing experience. So if you have any questions for us, feel free to come up and ask, and our panelists might be heading out, so just respect their time if you have specific questions for them as well.